What is up, camp believers and high performers? I am your high performance mentor and registered dietitian and host, Desi Abeda. Welcome to another Mentorship Mondays, where we give you bite sized options and education and application for you to be able to take some of the information and apply it to your life. And we do that in 10 to 15 minutes. So, welcome to our Mentorship Monday series. This past week, we really dove into the habit loop, which is a concept from Charles Duhigg. And we talked about this in the last episode. So if you have not had a chance to listen to the last episode, make sure that you press pause right now, whether you're on your walk, on your way to work, whatever you're doing, working out, anything that you're doing to build on habits that are really fulfilling and are high reward habits. Make sure you go back to the last episode. So episode 47, we talked about the habit loop and what it means for you to understand some of the habits that are now serving you and other habits that are actually more positive towards habit formation and things that you feel really good about. As we dove into that habit loop, we discussed how it cascades into an actual reward system, right? And so, kind of to recap a little bit, we had some sort of trigger. So, this trigger was a person, place, or thing. And so, oftentimes, it could be a certain time of day that triggers you to do a certain action. And that action actually produces some sort of reward system. So, as we dove into that last week, I really wanted to build onto it this week. So this is part one of our three-part series of how to build habits. Okay. And so a lot of this comes from the evidence-based training system. And so I'll make sure that I put the authors and a lot of the research studies that they talked about in the show notes, just to kind of give you a little bit of background for all my scientific-minded people out there. And so what we're diving into this today for our Mentorship Monday series is part one of helping you to understand what the initiation phase is behind you doing a habit or some sort of action that's actually going to build something that you're actually really proud of. And so let's go ahead and dive into what this means for you, a little bit of background, and obviously, as always, as you know, as your host here, like I'm always giving you homework, right? And my mom's a school teacher too. So I think in a lot of ways I try to teach in some similar ways, but this is how the application gets to help you to create a life that you're really proud of. Jim Quick talks about this all the time in the Quick Brain podcast. How many of us have books on our shelves that are self-help or self-development? He really encourages a lot of listeners, and I really love this, and I'm going to bite this from him, of allowing some of the information or education that you have to become actual self-help rather than shelf help, because a lot of us probably have a lot of those books on our shelf and we dove into it probably 3 pages in and we stopped, right? So this is where the application comes, because the information is readily available. All of us have access to Google. All of us have access to people that we might be able to ask questions, but the application is truly what changes your life, because I'm a firm believer, change your habits, change your life. And that's really what I build the foundation of our one-to-one or group coaching client programs. And so this is something to keep, just in the forefront of anything that you're thinking about. So that being said, I already did my introduction. Let's go ahead and dive into, how you can begin to apply this. All right. So one thing to keep in mind, habits account for 40% of our behaviors. And because of that, we actually have to understand the differences between motivation and willpower. I can't tell you how many times it never fails. When I onboard a new high performer, oftentimes what we are trying to examine is helping them to unlearn past stories or past things that they tell themselves. In a lot of ways, they talk about how they lack motivation. They talk about how they don't have time, and how that all or nothing thinking trap is a total part of their life. And because of that, they've told themselves this story that because they haven't been successful up to this point, it has to do with motivation. So what I wanted to do is to help us understand the differences between motivation and willpower. Now, I'm a firm believer in this too. And this is after a lot of research that I've done. And for those that don't know, for those who haven't been rocking with me day one, when I started in my career as a registered dietitian, I actually started in eating disorders. And one of the things that was really apparent of helping these people, and let me be honest with you too, like people who have struggled with an eating disorder or are currently or know someone, in most cases, those people are very, very high performing. So high performing that it starts to become something that is not beneficial to them. I can't tell you how many times working with a lot of this clientele, and I've joked with them too, like, yo, I can probably guess that you probably have done way more research than I have ever done in my life, because it becomes an obsession. So I say this to you because in a lot of ways, what we are trying to help you examine is some of the past conditioning that you tell yourself here, but even more so diving into it, we want to understand what behaviors do for us. So in the last episode, we discussed our reward system. So here, I'm a firm believer in helping people to understand that motivation is a huge lie. It's not that you lack motivation. It's very apparent that in most cases that people don't understand the role of willpower. Okay. And so as we break motivation down a little bit more, it involves the feeling of effort to do something. Right. And so oftentimes we confuse that with when we're really tired. And this is where willpower comes into play, because willpower is more of a direct result or a measure of your ability to limit your decision fatigue. So usually in my first 1 to 2 mentorship calls with new high performers, is helping them to understand how not only to be efficient with their time, but to be incredibly realistic about their personal bandwidth. Because if you're one of those people who cannot dedicate 3 to 4 hours to your body, to your habits, and things like that, then it makes total sense that the trajectory to which you feel like you should be at is probably not as realistic. Because what we want to do here is actually understand that one, we do have a personal bandwidth, and two, we can begin to challenge and be more efficient with how we examine things. I read a study a couple months back that was really flooring to me. They took a look at judges and how they make their verdicts, and they found that the judges earlier in the day were likely more able to sit and hear stories and to be present, and towards the end of the day they made their judgments very quickly, and they timed them. And I thought it was really fantastic, and it was a really good depiction of what happens with a lot of us, because most of us get caught in this like crazy unrealistic story, or this thing that we do to ourselves, where it's like, all right, when I get done with work, when I get done with dinner, for the parents out there, when I put the kids down, I'm going to work out, I'm going to plan for tomorrow, and I'm going to meal prep. And then they get mad at themselves for doing literally zero of that towards the end. And what it has more to do with is you're not lazy. You don't lack motivation. You're decision fatigued. You are fatigued. Okay. And so, with that being said, this is where we get to take a little bit of ownership. And this is where the scapegoat is actually a positive thing, because the scapegoat is not, in fact, your laziness. It's actually your ability to not be able to learn how to be more efficient with your own personal bandwidth and what you actually need to do. And so, as I say that, this is where we step into this first part, or this first phase, because we're going to go through as we create habit formation. I mean, how many of us out there have heard that lie that it takes 21 days to develop a habit? Um, that was me too. And I wish I hadn't heard that, because I probably would have been way more empathic and compassionate towards my behavior, because it actually takes 60 to 70. And that's crazy to think about, right? And in some ways, it actually might even take 90. It depends on the specific behavior. And so what I want to help you do today is to be very specific about what you're doing. And that's where we dive into our initiation phase. So this is our first part of habit formation, and creating a habit that you actually really believe in and that you want to do consistently. Okay, so what we want to do here with our initiation phase, and if you want visuals of this, obviously you can always go to our YouTube or our IGTV. If you're not following us on IG at I Made It Pod, this is where you can get the visuals here. But what we want to do here is we want to choose a specific behavior that you want to accomplish, and then understand the trigger that's responsible for taking that actual action. And this kind of builds on, again, each and every Mentorship Monday, we're doing habit stacking, kind of like what I'm imploring you to do on a day-to-day basis. But we talked about that trigger, or that cue that starts someone to initiate that actual habit. And so we want to dive into that a little bit more. So the best way for us to think about this, the big word here is specificity. We want to be extremely specific. We want to be specific about the behavior. We want to be specific about the trigger that helps us to be like, oh, I want to go do that one thing that helps me. And then we want to be specific about the time, the specific place that we want to be at. Like, specificity here is the name of the game. And we talked a couple episodes about measuring backwards. Each and every week for our high performing one-to-one and group coaching clients, I have them do a Friday check-in. And one of the questions that I asked them was like, hey, what specifically are we working on? Because details matter. they can either make or break behavior. Because if you're not clear, and I joke about this with my clients all the time, if you're not clear on what you're doing and you do your check-in and you're like, the thing that Desi and I talked about was eating better, right? I'm gonna jump into their direct messaging, be like, "Hey, I got your check-in. Let's talk a bit more specific, because what does that even mean? Because if I can help them in the same way that I'm helping you to dial in on a specific thing that's high rewarding, a specific trigger that's going to help you do that thing, a time, a place, then specificity here helps us to create momentum." And that's what this is. This is honestly a game of tiny little decisions that you're making towards momentum, because once we get in, and we'll dive into this in our next phase and in our third phase, but once we get momentum and things start to automate, right? And you're going to hear about this a little bit in the next couple of weeks. When things start to automate, where if you don't do a specific behavior or a specific habit that has really been serving you and you feel weird, this is where things are actually starting to automate, where you don't have to add or even spend a lot of mental energy, because it's already being done. And so for my high performing clients that listen to this podcast, one, for real, shout out to you all. You're probably seeing right now that for most of you who are into your months 3, 4, 5, 6, a year, and even a year and a half for a lot of you, you're probably noticing that I'm not even really talking to you about getting out for that walk. I'm not talking to you about your sleep hygiene. I'm not talking to you about, like, hey, get your fiber up, or hey, let's make sure that we have more balance here, because that's already been automated. And with those, like, even for our listeners out there who have no idea how our mentorship program goes, again, and if you want to learn a little bit more, there's links in the show notes. You can definitely go over there and learn a bit more. But how cool is that to be able to say, like, oh my God, I've changed my habits and I've changed my life. Like, round of applause to you all who's been able to do that. So as we get specific here, this is kind of how an example might look. So if you set an example, or you set a goal to eat a salad 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, the second that you get home, or for dinner, that's going to be way more specific than if you're like, I just want to eat more vegetables. Because if you were to tell any sort of mentor or registered dietitian, or even just a fitness coach, they're going to want more specifics. Like, okay, that sounds great, but tell me more. And this is where keeping this example is really imperative, because as we set a goal to eat a salad 5 days out of the week, Monday through Friday, for dinner, then we have to create a trigger. So that trigger oftentimes just might be, let's say if you want to do a post-it note, or and oftentimes when someone, in the first couple weeks, I show them what a balanced plate for my clients look like. And I tell them, like, hey, I want you to print this out, and I want you to put it smack on your freezer, right on your refrigerator, because subconsciously I'm helping to trigger you into making sure that you're doing that. And so for this trigger, like, you can definitely get a picture of a salad, if you will, and just smack it right on your fridge. But that trigger right there is going to remind you subconsciously and then consciously to create that momentum and to create that salad if you are someone who is looking to improve on their nutrition. Okay. And so obviously, as a registered dietitian, I'm really big on nutrition, because it's the forefront, along with sleep, along with strength and conditioning, and then along with mindfulness, towards what we view as a holistic measure of health. Right. And so when we do this, we want to make sure that we are creating momentum week to week. And so what now? Homework time. All right, here we go. So as you watch or listen to this, as always, I want you to take a screenshot. I want you to tag me. You can do at Desi Abeda and then at I Made It Pod. So I want you to do that, or if you can do it wherever you want, on Facebook. For my clients out there who are listening, you can do it in our one-to-one group coaching app. So I just want you to take a screenshot, and I want you to go through some of these pointers. So the first one is, okay, what's my goal? And so going back to that example that we had of the salad, if you're someone who's like, hey, I really want to improve on my health measures, I really want to improve my fiber. So this is what your goal might be. Like, hey, I want to improve on my fiber, I want to improve on my health. Okay. And again, lessening your body size is not the biggest indication of health. Your habits are. So let's stick to the habits here. So I want to implement more fiber. All right. So that's an example there. So that's your goal. So what will I do? This goes back to that specificity. So from there, you're going to want to be like, okay, I want to eat a salad for dinner 5 days out of the week, Monday through Friday. And where you will do it, or where I will do it, and this is that third thing that you're going to be doing, You're going to go ahead and write down, like, okay, I'm going to have this at dinner. So I already said that, right? Have it at the dinner table. And this doesn't have to be for nutrition. This can be for anything else that you desire. But here's the thing though. If you're finding that you are constantly failing, then your goal or your behavior or your habit in this way, it's not specific enough. It's too complicated, right? And so usually when I try to onboard a new client, like I'm trying to help them with very basic things. Hey, Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I want you to post your meals and I want you to make sure that you have balance on your plate. And for some who are brand new, I'm going to say, like, hey, let's start with breakfast. Okay, cool. You did breakfast this week. Let's start with breakfast and lunch next week. And in under 30 days, you find that you have at least a full month worth of balance. And this is how this works. So again, let's go ahead and reiterate what the homework is. So as you watch or listen, you're going to take a screenshot of this episode on IGTV or wherever you get your pods. You're going to write down, what's your goal? That's our first part. Your second part is, what am I going to do? What specific thing do I need to do? What trigger do I need to create for myself? And the third thing that you're going to be doing is, where am I going to do this? Where will I do it? Okay. And so as you're doing this, again, we want to apply this towards making sure that you are creating momentum for yourself, because if you're overcomplicating things, you're not a failure. You're just not specific enough. All right. So happy Mentorship Monday. As always, it's the application that everyone needs here. The information is readily available. We all have, for most of us at least, we all have thumbs and we all have fingers that we use it with our phones or even just typing things in. The information is readily available. It's the application that people need to invest in. Much love to you all. Later.